This presentation, An Introduction to Islam from Muhammad to Modernity, is designed to give an overview of the religion of Islam and its believers who are called Muslims. In this slide, I explain the reason why Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. It is due largely in part to family size. The Muslim woman has on average 2.9 children, and the average of all non-Muslims is 2.2. Muslims also have the youngest median age at age 24 compared with age 32 of all non-Muslims. Here I talk about the polytheistic religions in pre-Islamic Arabia and the story of Usai, who built his house adjacent to the Kaaba and charged people a toll to come in and worship their deities. So he was really making a profit off the most pious people. I talk about the birth of Muhammad, whose father died before he was born and mother died when he was 6 months old. Muhammad was considered to be an orphan raised by his uncle, and he worked in his uncle's caravan business. He married Khadija, who was considered to be the love of his life, and was 15 years his senior. Khadija was a successful businesswoman in her own right, and some people believe Khadija, they regard her as the mother of all believers and the grandmother of all the imams. Because of Muhammad's success, also in contrast to his modest upbringing as an orphan, he felt strongly against the division of the rich and poor in society. He was on a meditation retreat when he had his first encounter with Allah, or God, through the angel Gabriel. Like other prophets, Muhammad rejected this encounter as an encounter with God and questioned what could have happened to him. And it was a friend of Khadija's who really proclaimed that he was a prophet. And over the next several years, the words of the Quran were revealed to Muhammad. In the year 622, when people were really thinking Muhammad's new ideas and his proclamation of having the divine word from Allah, Muhammad faced persecution in Mecca. He and several companions traveled to Medina, and they established what became known as the first Muslim community. Between the years 610 to 632 CE, the Quran was revealed to Muhammad. It was not written until years after his death, but rather it was transmitted orally. The Quran has 114 chapters, and after the first verse, the verses are arranged in order from longest to shortest. Unique to the Quran is its inclusion of men and women in its instruction. In almost every verse that mentions something men should do, there is the flip side of that women should do it also. The Quran includes the story of Abraham of the Hebrew Bible and tells the story of Ishmael as Abraham's firstborn and the son that the son that Abraham was to sacrifice. And Ishmael is Abraham's son from whom Muhammad descended, and therefore all of the people of Islam are descendants of Ishmael. The Quran also recognizes Jesus, or Isa, as a fully human prophet, but it rejects any claims that might reduce the status of God, including that Jesus is God's son or part of the Trinity. Muslims also do not believe that Jesus died by crucifixion. While the Quran is considered to be the word of God transmitted through Muhammad, the Hadith, through narratives about Muhammad and his companions and his family, includes important teachings of how to be Muslim. These stories often include the chain of communication from which they were conveyed. Because human-to-human transmission is the foundation of the Hadith, it is a source of division among the believers. These next two slides reflect teachings from the Hadith, the 6 main articles of faith in Islam, primarily the oneness of Allah, and that is actually in both of these, the main articles and the 5 pillars of Islam. And then you see the rest of the articles of faith. The 5 pillars of Islam appear in order of their importance, or perhaps in order of their universality, and they are all built upon one another. The first, bearing witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, is universal and non-negotiable, and is the direction to pray. The other 3, observed by the most pious, also seem to carry the understanding of if you are able. Paying zakat is the Muslim kind of equivalent of tithing. It is expected that people give 2.5% to 3% of their annual wages to the mosque. This is done only if one can afford to. For the well-off, zakat is recognized as a means of purifying their wealth. Fasting during Ramadan is required for the able-bodied. The very young and the elderly are exempt, as it might weaken them. Fasting is from sunup to sundown, and the fast is broken with prayer and an evening meal. Pilgrimage or Hajj to Mecca is required of most Muslims, but only, again, if one has the means to go. The Muslim people as a community identify as an ummah, and the ummah community is to reflect the oneness of God. But for centuries, there have been 3 basic groups of Muslims: the Sunnis, the Shiites, and the Sufis. The division began at the time of Muhammad's death and was centered around who should follow the Prophet as leader of Islam. Some, the Sunnis, believe that it should be Muhammad's father-in-law and close friend Abu Bakr, while others, the Shia, believed it should be his son-in-law and father of his grandchildren, Ali. The Sunnis comprise the majority, with 1.5 billion followers. Translated, their name means people of the tradition. As such, they consider themselves to be the Orthodox branch of Islam. They make up the majority of populations of Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. The Shia number about 200 million people. They are in the majority in Iran, Iraq, Bahrain, Azerbaijan, and according to some estimates, Yemen. The Sufis are the mystical group. They seek direct contact with the divine. The Ahmadiyya is a revival movement that was begun in 1889. Ahmadi Muslims follow the teachings of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who they believe is the foretold Messiah. Ahmad was sent to bring peace and restore justice in the world. Ahmadis condemn jihad of the sword and believe in the convergence of all religions. This community is condemned as heretical by many. Here I talk about prayer ritual that Muslims pray 5 times a day. I talk about baby naming, that the baby's head is shaved and the birth is traditionally celebrated with an animal sacrifice. In the Muslim faith, the sacrifice is not burned, but rather used to feed the poor. Muslim boys are circumcised, but not as infants. They're circumcised between the ages of 7 and 13. Marriage in Islam is the foundation of the family, and the family is the center of the faith. Husbands and wives have complementary roles, and mothers are highly respected. The death ritual in the Islamic tradition is that the deceased is bathed, usually by a family member, and covered in white sheets. They're buried as soon as possible after death. The funeral service is usually marked by silent prayer, and cremation is forbidden. In these next two slides, I explain the lunar calendar of Islam, which is about 354 days long, 11 days shorter than the Julian calendar. Observance of this calendar is the reason Muslim holidays occur in different seasons over the course of several years. For example, the month of Ramadan in 2015 was June 17th to July 17th, and next year in 2020 it will be April 23rd to May 23rd. Ramadan is considered to be the holy month. It was during the last 10 days of Ramadan, it is believed, that Muhammad received his first revelation from Allah. Here we see other celebrations that are recognized by Islam in various degrees. For my discussion on Islam and modernity, I drew from mostly my conversations with my Muslim friend. In her brand of feminism, regarding women in Islam, in Aziza's brand of feminism, she makes the distinction between culture and religion. While culture has been patriarchal, the religion, in its purest form, as she sees it, recognizes women and provides for their protection. She claims Muhammad was a feminist, like we claim Jesus was a feminist, and his love for Aziza recognizes his humility and his lack of chauvinism. In discussion of other groups, I draw from the reading about Muslim immigrants versus the distinction of African American Muslims who brought Islam with them in the days of the slave trade. Most most Muslims who we recognize in the United States, I think we think of as Muslim immigrants. We see someone who's Muslim and wonder where they're from, when in reality a good number of them are African American Muslims. In the discussion regarding post 9/11 Islam, I talk about my own observations that 9/11 emphasized the personalities in our country and divided them into two distinct groups, those who are fueled by fear and those who love. Here I talk about the so-called war on terror and the eventual Muslim ban that both find their root cause in the extremist attacks of September 11, 2001. I recall the special episode of The West Wing that aired on October 3rd, 2001, titled Isaac and Ishmael. One of the central characters in this episode draws this analogy. Radical Islamists are to Islam as the KKK is to Christianity, making the point that radical Islamists are not typical. They're the exception to the rule of the people of Islam, just as the Ku Klux Klan may have its roots in Christianity. It by no means represents Christians. Here in my last slide, using what I encountered on my visits and in my reading, I give future interfaith practitioners a few essential notifications. Mosque etiquette, and including the greeting, and also things that they may encounter while they're reading holy text. Here are some resources that I would recommend for future reading and that may flesh out this very brief introduction to Islam that I have provided in this slideshow here. I was especially struck by this YouTube video that was all about Khadija. It was so interesting to see these religious leaders just really revering the love of Muhammad's life and her impact on the entire faith of Islam.